Hello everyone and welcome to a new video on ToborTech's Java Basics course. Today's video is about the for each loop in Java programming. So without further ado, let's get started. A while back in this Java Basics course, we learned about using the while and for loops in Java programming. To quickly review, while loops run while some condition is true. So while I am hungry, for instance, I will continue to eat. For loops run for a certain number of times. So for 5 times, I will continue to do something like maybe turning the lights on and off for fun. Today's topic is the for each loop, which is a very convenient way of iterating over an array or array list. So let's first think about how we would print out all the values of an array using the loops we already know. So using a while loop and a for loop, we can write these two programs. We can see that in the while loop version of this program, we have an array, an integer array called ARR, stores 4 values, and we have a loop control variable called I, which is initially set to 0. While this loop control variable is less than the length of the array, we will print out the value of array at the index I, and then we will increment I by 1. So if I were to copy this program into our Java Online editor and run this program, we should see the values of 1, 2, 3, and 4 printed out on a single line. So we indeed got 1, 2, 3, and 4 printed out. We can also use a for loop to achieve the same thing. So here is a for loop version of our print out all the values of an array program. We have the same array, and we have a for loop. So we have a loop control variable, I is equal to 0, and the ending condition, and then the incrementing of the variable I. Same print statement, and let's take a look at the output if I were to run this program instead. And if I just run, we should see 1, 2, 3, 4 printed out again. And these are not that bad, honestly, but because going over the elements in an array or array list is such a common task, there is a type of loop just for that, and it's called the for each loop. And by the way, these two programs can be easily modified to handle an array list as well, just by changing the indexing to use the .get method rather than using the square brackets for an array. Now on to the for each loop. So here's the syntax of a for each loop. The reason why it's called a for each loop is because it will run once for each element of an array. So let's first read this line. For each element in array, we would do some stuff. Translated into Java code would look like this. So we have for, that's the same thing as a for loop, but inside of the parentheses of the for loop header, you will see that we have quite a bit of a difference from a normal for loop. So we write data type, element, and then a colon, and then the array. So what this is saying is that for each element of the array, we would do some stuff, and we can also access the variable element inside of this code. The data type here is just to make a complete declaration of the element variable. So element is a variable, so we can access it inside of the loop. So if we were to use a for each loop instead of the while loop and for loops in the program above, we can write something like this. So we have the same array as before, and we can shorten this slightly. We can, inside of the parentheses, change our program to say int num colon ARR. So what this is doing is for each number inside of array, we would print it out. So if I copy this program onto our editor and run our program, we see 1, 2, 3, 4 printed out once again. So in this loop, it will run once for each element of the array. And the first time the loop runs, num is equal to 1. The second time the loop runs, num is equal to 2. And then 3, and then it will be equal to 4 the last time it runs. And each time it will print out the num variable on this line of code. Notice that the for each loop can only be used to access values, not modify them. Because num is a variable that's independent from the values of the array, we cannot use the modification of the num variable to change array. So num is kind of another variable living out on its own. So changing num will not change array. So we still have to use good old good old for loops and while loops to change the values of an array. So here we have just a little program to show you how we cannot use a for each loop to change the values of an array. So if I paste this program here and run it, you'll see that here we just print out the values same as here. So we print out the values twice. Between those two printouts, we tried to modify our array by changing the num variable, which is not a good idea because it did not change anything. Here we tried to multiply num by 2 and store it back inside of num. Now num will be doubled, but num has nothing to do with array. So changing num will not change array. Therefore, when we try to print out the values of array once again, we'll see that it's the same thing. We get 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 again. So just remember that we can only use a for loop or a while loop to change the values of an array using indexing. And just to keep in mind as well that for each loops can also be used with Arraylist. We can just use the same syntax as with arrays. So we make an array list here, add some values, and then for each element inside of the array list, we'll print out the value. So let me just paste this code inside of our program editor. And of course, I forgot to import the Arraylist class, so we can't really run this program. So import java.util.arraylist at the top of our program, and we should see true, true, and false printed out. Perfect. Now on to an exercise. So it's pretty simple. Make a string array list, add a few values, print these values out using a for each loop, modify some value, and then print the values out again. So take a few moments to do that, and then come on back when you're done. Here is just one solution that you could have come up with. You probably have something very different, but here we have an array list that stores strings. It's called programming languages, and it's a new array list string. In programming languages, we add Python, C++, C, and then R and SQL, and we use a for each loop to print out the values of this array list. So for each string S here, for each individual string inside of the array list programming languages, we will print out S. And then we will use the .set method to change the element of programming languages at the index 2 to C#. So now C would become C#. And then we try to run this program once again, or run this for loop, for each loop once again to see the values of this array list. Let me just copy this program and paste it in our editor again and run this program. And we got Python, C++, C, R, SQL, and then after we modify our technically the third element, but index of 2, so our third element of our array list, we now see Python, C++, and then C#, R, and SQL. So C got changed to C#. Now, just summary. When accessing values of an array or array list, for each loops can often be more convenient than using traditional for loops. But always remember that you cannot modify the values of an array or array list using for each loops. You have to use a for loop or a while loop for that. And that's it for this video about for each loops in Java programming. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. We'll see you in a future video.